Welcome to this week's edition of the Wispy Mop Music Acoustic Radio Podcast Series. I'm your host, Todd, middle initials Z. Walker. Yes, that's right, it's me. And I have a special guest with me today, Guy Hofer, who's sitting about 4 feet away from me. And I noticed when you arrived today, you were wearing a Martin baseball hat.
Yes.
And I have seen you play a Martin guitar.
Yes, that's true.
How long have you been playing Martin guitars?
Well, it was a gift to myself when I retired from working. So it was in 2013 when I got that guitar.
So what did you retire from?
Education. I was, I was a teacher for 14 years and then moved into counseling. From counseling, guidance counselor in a high school, I went to Frederick County Public Schools and worked at TJ as a sort of a crisis counselor for 10 years. And then I went into administration, which was the biggest mistake I ever made.
That's where the politics entered into it, I guess.
Yes, absolutely.
So what did you teach?
I taught French and Spanish.
2 languages?
Yes. That's a long story, too. I wanted to major in French and go back to my old high school and teach French. And so when I went to apply for the job at my old high school, they said, well, you know, we'll be glad to hire you for French, but you need to be able to teach Spanish, too, also. And so I said, but, you know, I haven't, this was in the second semester of my senior year of college. And so what I did was I started taking Spanish classes, both in person and online, so that I could pick up a minor in Spanish, so that I could go back to my old high school and teach. So when I did go into the classroom, I had, at that time, we taught 5 classes, and so I taught 4 classes of Spanish and 1 of French, and was always a chapter ahead of the kids when I first started out.
I've heard that from a lot of teachers where they have to study the week before for next week's lessons.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
So where was your hometown? Where was it you wanted to go back and teach?
I was born and raised in Chicago and was there until 1985 when I moved out here. My best friend and I went back to our old high school to teach. And he was frustrated because he wanted to become a principal, and we worked for a private parochial school, and back then that wasn't possible for him. He had moved up in administration as far as he could go. So he applied throughout the country to become a principal and was hired in Frederick County as the principal of Middletown High.
Oh.
And so that the summer after his first year, he invited my wife and I out to visit. And he always had an ulterior motive, and the ulterior motive was to try and entice me to come out here. And Frederick is absolutely beautiful. And so anyway, while we were out here touring and stuff, he said, I have an opening in guidance at Middletown. Would you be willing to come here to work as a guidance counselor? And I looked at my wife and she said, I knew this was going to happen. Well, he and I grew up together. We met in elementary school, went to high school together, college together, went back to our old high school to teach together. So anyway, she said, I'll give you 2 years. If I don't like it, we're going back to Chicago. All her family, she has 7 brothers, all her family is in Chicago. I couldn't get her to move now.
Really?
Yeah. She's here. She loves it here.
So when she plans some sort of a holiday, she tells the brothers, you're coming here.
Well, I wish it were that way, but no, we have to go into Chicago. As a matter of fact, since we've been here almost 40 years now, I guess, and her one brother, 6 of her brothers, is that right? 5 of her brothers have been here. 1 has not since we moved here. And he finally came for Thanksgiving. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So it was his first trip
He
here.
finally discovered what it is about Frederick County that you like so much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So now, were you playing guitar this whole time? When did you start playing guitar?
I was 8 years old.
Really?
Yes. Of age. They used to laugh about it because I had this ukulele, and I used to come along and I'd have my legs dangling off of the side of the stage playing a ukulele, and I had broken all the strings but one, but I was playing away. So anyway, until I was 16, I used to go with him, and I might, let's see, when I was 12, he bought me my first acoustic guitar. I started on a Gibson hollow body electric. Mm-hmm. That came along with the lessons. He was very much a person who felt that it was really important to have an understanding of music, mm-hmm. as well as to be able to play. And so he got me lessons, and like I said, I played the Gibson electric until I was 12, and then they bought my first acoustic guitar, and that was called an E. Ross.
Never heard of that one.
It's an Italian-made guitar, and I still have it.
You do?
Yes.
Is it still playable?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, whenever I go to any of the open jams, I usually bring that one instead of the Martin.
Why?
I guess it's nostalgia. You know, I want to sort of... I don't know how to say it exactly, but it just brings back memories of my family and all the fun that I had playing that guitar. You know, I brought that thing to the beach, and you know, it's a sturdy, good, solid sounding, good sounding guitar. So you know, and so I guess for nostalgic reasons, I continue to play it.
Now, how long did you play that before you transitioned to another brand or to a Martin, if the Martin was the next brand?
The Martin was the next brand. And then after I retired, that's when I started collecting guitars. At the dismay of my wife, she was not happy. I now own a Cordova nylon string and an electric nylon string guitar.
Is it Godin?
Godin,
yeah.
Yes. And then I have a guitar made out of some other material that I use as a traveling guitar. We have gone to Antigua over the summers, and so I wanted to have a travel guitar so I could play. And I forget what the name of that one is, but it's real sturdy, small, mm-hmm. Easy to travel with. And let's see, I think that's it, I guess.
So at home, do you play the Martin more often or the E. Ross?
I play the E. Ross most often. I want to protect
mm-hmm.
that Martin. That Martin is my baby.
Yeah.
You know, I love playing it. I probably should play it more often. You had mentioned something about GarageBand, and I was wondering if, you know, you thought that produced good quality, because I'd like to record some things.
It can. The trick is the microphone, how good of a quality the microphone is, and where you place it.
I see.
And how you EQ it, although in many instances you tend to record flat. Like you had asked me at the Sky Stage that one time about running sound.
Right.
In live sound, what I do, and it was explained to me to do this, is start, if you've got the row of sliders, or if you've got the 3 dials, low, mids, and highs,
right.
Start with everything in what they call detent, which is 0. You're not adding any frequencies or taking away any frequencies. And then listen, and then remove the frequencies that don't sound good.
I see.
The human voice tends to be a mid-range instrument. Mm-hmm. An acoustic guitar is also a mid-range instrument.
Right.
So if you're singing and playing a guitar, you're competing with each other, especially if you're playing an acoustic guitar that has mahogany back and sides, because that's more heavily mid-range.
I see.
Whereas a rosewood would be somewhat scooped in the mid-range. When they say scooped, it just means the mid-range frequencies are dropped. And that's just the natural sound of rosewood. It accentuates the low end. Well, it doesn't so much accentuate it, it just drops the mids, so it sounds like it accentuates the lows and the highs.
I see.
Also has more of a natural reverb sound. If you play a spruce top, rosewood back and side acoustic guitar without miking it or anything, and then you pick up a mahogany guitar that has a spruce top, the mahogany guitar, a lot of the fingerstyle players like that, and the bluegrass people, it doesn't have as much natural reverb. Excuse me. It's almost a drier sound, woodier sound.
I see.
I personally like rosewood for two reasons. One, I like that natural reverb sound. And two, since I like to sing, the guitar is not competing with my voice as much as it would be. So in live sound, what I do is, theoretically, I start at neutral. And that's what I tell people to do. Start at neutral and then just probably drop some of the mids. If it's just the low, mid, and high dial,
I see.
drop the mids to maybe 10 o'clock.
Ah,
If you're getting a little bit of a high-pitched squeal, then you probably need to lower the highs.
I see.
And you'll get that and you've probably seen people the first time they ever perform at an open mic, and they'll say, I'm a little nervous, I've never done this before. And it depends on the host and how good they are with the controls. The person will get up to the mic and they'll say something or they'll immediately jump back because they're not used to hearing their voice louder than it is when they hear it from speaking normally.
Right.
The problem with that is if they move back automatically while they sing, the microphone's working harder to pick up their voice. So what it's doing is it's picking up, if you increase the volume to pick up their voice more, it's also picking up a lot of the room noises, and you're more apt to get a squeal. So when I did the sound for the FSK Christmas show, 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, I had to mic the elementary school choirs.
Right.
And I'd never really done that before, but so I took two microphones, put the mic stands as high as I could, angled them down so I could kind of pick up everybody.
Sure. Right.
And the first thing I did is I dropped the highs almost completely down.
Oh.
Because they were going to be so far from the microphone, and it actually worked really, really well. I think I increased them a little bit, but I didn't have any squeal that I probably would have if I'd left it at detent or whatever. And what you'll see sometimes is, and you'll hear it more on guitars, and more if they have a pickup in the guitar that has an undersaddle pickup.
Okay.
When they strum it, you either are going to get a heavy low end boom or a real brittle sound.
Oh.
And those are usually the guitars where they've got the preamp in the side, and there's three sliders,
Yes.
low, mids, and highs.
Yes.
And so often when I ran open mics, I would say, just play for me. It'd be like, oh my gosh, that sounds horrible. I'd go over and I'd say, I see you've got this thing in the side here. I play dumb. How do you set those? Because I'd noticed the highs are all the way up and all the lows and mids are all the way down. So there's nothing but brittle. They'd look at it and go, what do you mean? How do I set them? Well, how do you set them? Well, it's however the guitar comes out of the case. So I would then say, make a suggestion. Well, yeah. And then I would slide them to where it sounded good. I said, just remember that. That's a good place to start. So to answer a very long-winded detour there to answer your question about garage bands, there have been CDs or albums made by big-time performers, which are hit records, or what I would call a hit record. Doesn't mean it made the charts. It just means that I think it's really good. And it was all done on garage bands.
Is that right?
It's just a simpler version. There's things you cannot do because it just doesn't have the capability. It doesn't have as many sound files where you could add a piano or add this, because a lot of the programs now, and Pro Tools is the big one, they've got all these add-ons that you and I would never use. All we need is EQ, a little reverb and some compression, maybe a little echo or delay.
Sure.
Maybe. But it's best to record fairly flat and then do all the EQing in what we call post-production.
Oh. Now, when you say flat, you don't mean vocally flat. You mean...
No, just EQ. Don't add and don't take away any frequencies.
I see.
Unless you have to get a halfway decent sound immediately. In a recording studio, and I'm going to be going back into the recording studio on next Thursday and Friday. We're going to be doing the percussion tracks for some of the songs I've recorded. And the studio's down in Poolesville area.
I see.
And you're more than welcome to come down one of those days. It'll be a fairly long day. All we would be doing is sitting in the control room while the percussionist is adding the percussion to it.
Uh-huh.
But it's a lot of fun. And speaking of that, see that CD right there? That's I gave that to you. That's one that's the only song we've recorded in the last year that's actually been finalized.
Oh.
So that's the actual send it out into the the Ethernet or cyberspace or whatever you want to call it. That's it. So I wanted you to have that.
Well, thank you.
But to give you an idea, those are the people who recorded. Mark Nelson, right there, he's the fellow who's going to be doing the percussion on those songs.
I see.
So again, to answer your question, GarageBand is a terrific program. It really depends on the quality of the microphone, where you place it in relation to the sound hole, and then how you set the frequencies, the EQs and things when you're recording it. And I think I mentioned this to you, but I've mentioned it to many people. It's if it sounds good to you, it probably sounds good to them.
Okay.
If it sounds bad to you, then it sounds bad to them.
Sure.
They may not realize that because not everybody has a good ear.
Uh-huh.
But the whole idea of running sound live for me is to make that performer, no matter how good or bad they actually perform, to sound the best that they can at that given moment.
Yeah, I see.
So that someone who's in the audience who knows music and can tell whether something is good or not, they may say, well, they can't really play that well. But the sound's pretty good.
Uh-huh.
In other words, not the sound of them playing, but the overall. Yes.
Yeah.
So that's all you're doing. Because the GarageBand is a terrific program. It's fairly easy to use once you figure it out.
I see. Well, that's on my list of things to do then, starting this January.
Well, you've been retired, would you say, 10 years?
2013 is when I retired.
10 years goes by quickly, doesn't it?
It
when we
sure
get to our
does.
age.
It's amazing.
I met someone who I hadn't seen in probably 5 or 6 years the other night at a Christmas party. And then I saw her daughter last night at the Messiah at the Weinberg.
Uh-huh.
And I said, oh, I saw your mom last week. It's great to see her. She goes, looks pretty good for 88, doesn't she? And I went, 88?
Wow.
Wait a minute, that's the, whoa, that's too close for comfort.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
So on the you're going to ask a question.
Well, I was just going to say, 2 years ago, talk about nostalgia. When my dad passed away, I inherited his fiddle.
Oh.
And it sat until 2 years ago and collected dust, basically. And so I decided, given what I know about music, I'm going to give this a shot and see if I can learn how to play it. I remember when I was about 16 or 17, I said to my dad, I said, do you think I could play the fiddle? He looked at me, he said, no. And I think in the back of his mind, he was thinking, well, the fiddle has no frets. Mm-hmm. You've been playing with frets your whole life. There's no pick, and bowing is the actual challenge to playing the fiddle. So I think he was probably thinking, that's probably not going to happen. But I didn't let that hold me back, so I've picked up the fiddle since then.
So how's it gone?
Not bad. I'm able to play tunes, not very fast. I have to play them slow so that they're accurate. And to be honest with you, I would like to record something that my grandkids can remember. When I was growing up, my dad would bring the fiddle and I'd bring the guitar, and we'd sit around and play together, mm-hmm. and everybody would sing along, and, we'd go to picnics and do the same kind of thing. My family doesn't do that. First of all, my daughter's family, the kids are running off in all different kinds of directions, and my son lives in North Carolina, so it's hard to do that. But what I would like to do is leave something so that they can remember me by. Mm-hmm. My dad, his band made an album. It was a vinyl album, and it got all warped and I can't find it anywhere anymore. So, I don't have that opportunity to listen to my dad play. He was really good. He played violin in the orchestra when he was in high school, and then went on to the service and played bluegrass and that kind of music, old time, the standards from that era. And then when he joined up with, they were called the Kenosha Cornhuskers.
Oh, cool. What a neat name.
Yeah. The guy that booked their jobs was the guy who wrote the jingle to Oscar Mayer.
Oh, really?
Yeah. His name was Dick Trentledge. He was the promoter, I guess, is what you would call him. But like I said, I had that album and it got ruined. And
that's the problem with the original LPs were more of a ceramic type of a plastic. I seen they were brittle. As kids,
that.
we were told don't drop these.
Right.
And then the problem with the more modern ones from the late 50s on is, yes, they do. They warp.
Yep.
Leave them in the sunlight or whatever it is. So many of the 45s we had as kids, if I find a box of them, take them out, half of them are either so scratched because we used to pull them out like playing cards, not realizing we're putting crosshatch, on them.
Exactly.
Or somehow they get stored next to the heater or something like that, and you pick it up, and it's the stylus can't follow it.
Right.
Too many hills and valleys.
Exactly.
Well, that would be fun if you could somehow find the recording, so you'd have to have that for your dad, of your dad's recording from the band.
I wish I could. I don't even know where to begin to look, to be honest with you. I contacted, Mr. Trentledge died, so I was able to find his daughter, and I contacted her and asked her if she had anything like that, and she didn't. But she was one of the vocalists.
Oh, really? Yeah.
He wrote the jingle, and then his family are the
voices we
voices hear? that were recorded when they played that. Yeah.
I'm gonna just touch you for because as kids we used to sing that jingle all the time.
Yep, I did too. And I didn't realize this until I started researching Mr. Trentledge and finding his daughter, and then that's when I discovered that he wrote the jingle. My dad never told me that.
Well, probably from your dad's perspective, it's just, that's a guy I know. He does this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right.
No big deal, Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he got them a gig on the Old Opry.
Did he really? Wow.
Yeah.
And which is, from what I understand, that's not an easy thing to have happen.
Yeah.
You have to know somebody, or you have to be on their radar so that they think you're worthy of that.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that band was excellent. They had a guitar player who was my idol, as a kid growing up. That's why, I brought my guitar and that goofy ukulele with me and stuff. But he played professionally. He was on the radio. They had a bass player who would fill in with mandolin every once in a while. And then they had this accordionist who had this huge amp that he would plug his accordion into. And in addition to the square dancing and stuff, they would play dance music. They were known as a square dance band that would teach people how to square dance that evening.
Wow.
So, and I got to be I got to play the female part when I got older. My dad would bring me up on stage and he'd say, "All right, Guy, come on, we need to show the people how to do the do-si-do and all that kind of thing."
As long as he didn't do the Ginger Rogers thing where, I do everything he does but backwards in high heels.
Yeah, that's right.
So from a fingering standpoint, with no frets on the fiddle, and it took me years to realize that the fiddle and a violin are the same instrument. It's how you play the darn thing.
That's right. Because
that's one of those big questions. People who don't know, if you pose the question, they go, "Oh gosh, I don't know." And but anyways, and it's a very small fretboard.
Yes. Which, when you've flattened the tips of your fingers, it gets a little bit more of a challenge to hit the right notes and stuff. But the advantage is there are no frets, so you can move your fingers just a tiny bit, and you hit the right note. But what I've learned is that there's patterns that your fingers follow. So just to give you an example, your first finger starts here. I guess people can see this, right?
Well, no, because I don't have the cameras going. We just have the audio, yeah.
Anyway, then your middle two fingers are close together, and the third finger is farther apart. That's one of the patterns that the scales follow. And then from that, you can, pick out tunes and stuff.
Was it difficult to learn a scale?
At first, but not difficult in the sense that there's a lot of good books out there that, show you these patterns that your fingers need to follow. The real hard part, I find, is the bowing. Because the bow, even though you have rosin on the bow, it slips around if you don't follow the exact same direction. So you have to teach your arm not to move even just a little bit, because that can change the sound.
Oh, I see. So in other words, it would be almost like it has to be exactly at 180 degrees.
Yes.
Because if you move it slightly, it's going to, that makes sense.
Yeah, so it sort of moves in an arc,
right,
and slides all over the strings, and then it sounds really bad.
Yeah. Do you remember Red Skelton?
Yes. Oh, for sure.
I don't recall the actual title of the music that was the theme song. I always referred to it as the Red Skelton theme.
I probably...
And they pluck it on the violin.
Yes.
And I didn't realize how they made that sound until I think it was 7th or 8th grade. And we had one of those assemblies where you all file into I think we were in the gymnasium, because that's where the stage was in so many schools.
Right.
And I thought it was a full orchestra. Probably was only 15 people. Might not even have been that big. It might have been more of a like a 5 or 8 piece. But anyways, they introduced, and they said, "You're going to recognize this tune." They got up, and they plucked that. And it's like, my gosh, I didn't realize that's how they played that. And I've always loved that. And I should look that up, because I haven't heard that in a long time. But
I think it's called pizzicato.
Oh, okay.
I think that's what it's called.
But what a great sound.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There was a girl who came through Frederick, we're talking 20 years ago plus. We did the Monday Night Songwriter Showcase at Brewers Alley for many years, and before that it was at West Side Cafe.
Remember people talking about that, yeah.
Yep. And when we did it at the West Side Cafe, and I wasn't really involved in it at that point other than being an observer, is a girl came through and she played, I think it was a viola. Size-wise, it couldn't have been a bass. It wasn't a violin, but she would play it like a guitar.
Oh, is that right?
And it made a very unique sound, and she did it somewhat as a gimmick.
I see.
Because if you were just another one of the people in the line that's playing a guitar, and it's like, oh yeah, but look what she's doing. It kind of moves you forward up the pecking order, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And she basically just fingerpicked it.
Huh. Well, it's interesting. If I'm learning a new song and I want to try and figure out the melody, I'll play the violin like a guitar.
Well, you really?
Yeah, with just my thumb or my first finger. But and then I'll add the bow, and that's when it becomes more of a challenge.
Now, the thing that I've always been curious about is you watch sometimes, and while they're playing, sometimes some of those filaments, or whatever you want to call them, break, and then so when they're playing, there's a tail down there. Does that happen often, or is that just a...
Hasn't happened to me ever.
No? Okay.
Not yet. It's interesting. I've learned a lot since I've inherited my father's violin. But there are these insects called bow mites that actually eat the horsehair. The bow has horsehair. And apparently there are these tiny little bumps or something on the horsehair that actually allows for the sound to come out as clear as it does. Anyway, these bow mites will chew away, and I remember picking up a bow. It wasn't my dad's bow. It was another bow that my son had purchased. And so they had chewed away all the horsehair from the frog. And so it was just dangling. And I thought, oh, my God, what happened? So I took it to a friend of mine, and he said, oh, you probably had bow mites. So violin's a pretty interesting instrument.
That'd be an interesting name for a bluegrass band.
That's right.
The bow mites.
Yeah.
I mean, was it bromide? They used to mix in the
that's right.
from the old commercials back when we were kids.
Right.
And then out of that came, that came first, I think, didn't it? Or then Alka-Seltzer kind of took over.
Right.
I thought that was the coolest thing. We didn't get to watch television much when I was a kid. One, we had poor reception because it was the aerial. Back then, the aerials didn't work well past 30 miles, and we were a good 50 to 70 miles from the stations.
I see.
But I always thought that looked so cool when they would, put the powder in the glass, pour the water, and it would just foam right up, and then they drink it, and I think, I want to try that. It's like soda. And then my mom said, you want to try that? Sure. That was a rude awakening.
Yeah. Well, that's like when I was a kid, I always wanted to have coffee. I'd see my parents have coffee, and my parents said, you're not going to have any coffee. And I said, oh, come on, please. So they bought this stuff called Postum.
Oh, yes, I remember Postum. Yeah.
And they made it for me. I decided I didn't want to have any more to do with coffee at that point.
It's the same reaction I had to my first beer.
Oh, is it?
Because neither of my parents ever drank. My aunts and uncles didn't drink, so that was foreign to me.
Uh-huh.
And growing up in high school, of course, you didn't, and I was involved in sports, so you had a very long day. You got home from sports, you had dinner, you did your homework, you went to bed. And we did a lot of the family gatherings, like you mentioned.
Uh-huh.
And we had foreign exchange students, so on weekends we'd have,
oh, wow.
They'd either come to our house or we'd go to somebody else's houses, potluck and the whole bit. And none of it involved alcohol. So for me, when I learned that my friends in high school, and then when I got to college, beer was the king.
Uh-huh.
And I remember going down to, and of course, alcohol in the college dorms back in the late 60s was a no-no. And this fellow, and he was 6'9", or 6'10", and he wanted to, for his, was it his 18th birthday? Or his 20th birthday, something like that. He wanted to have Southern Comfort and beer.
Oh.
And there was 3 of us in the room because we had to secret it in. And he says, you got to try it. I said, I'm not trying that. And he says, well, have a beer. I said, I've never had beer. You never had beer. So I took a sip of that, and I thought, who in their right mind would, sort of like the first time you try a cigarette, it's like,
right.
No. So when you started playing guitar, you said you started on the Gibson.
Right.
Is that what? Do you remember what model that was?
It was a Starburst.
Mm-hmm.
It had one pickup, and
like an ES335 or ES something. Or I've forgotten.
I don't think I ever knew.
Mm-hmm.
My brother asked to borrow it after a while. And somehow it got lost. So
wouldn't you like to have that back now?
Oh, absolutely. I love that guitar.
Yeah.
It was nice looking. It sounded good. But anyway, it's gone.
Did you start out as a strummer or a flat pick strummer, finger strummer, or a finger stylist? Or what's your transition in your musical career?
So while I was taking lessons, I was picking melodies. Mm-hmm. And then I was using the Mel Bay method.
Yeah.
And eventually got into some chord melodies. And then I became a strummer. When I turned 16, I sort of went my own way in terms of the guitar and the music that I played. I became a big fan of folk music. You know, I was a kid of the 60s, and so Arlo Guthrie was one of my heroes, still is to this day. Peter, Paul, and Mary, who else? And I also was a big John Denver fan and did a lot of John Denver songs. And I would basically strum. I didn't really play much in terms of melody, although I could if I had the music in front of me. And again, when I retired, I decided that I wanted to be able to play at least a lick or two. And so I started learning different scales. I knew how to play all the major and minor scales, but I didn't know the pentatonics and how they're used, and knew very little about the blues. And so I started branching out a little bit.
Now, I say, and I have said many, many times, I'm going to learn that on the guitar.
Okay.
I'm really bad at sitting down and practicing it.
Uh-huh.
So was that because of all the teaching you did where you could focus and learn all that? Because I would have given up after 3 or 4 days, probably.
Really?
Yeah, just gone back to what I normally do. It's called lazy guitar.
I think when I was younger, I probably would have given up, quickly. But when I, was in my 70s, 70 to 72, I started working hard at that stuff. And after a while, because I had practiced scales for so long, it sort of came natural to me to sit down and learn a scale and then play it over and over. So, if I were watching TV, for example, I'd pick up my guitar and I'd practice that scale while, the commercials were going on. And eventually I was able to memorize them that way.
Now, you say memorize. Do you mean finger memorization? Like, in other words, we're training our fingers to move that way.
Right.
Yes, it is memorization, but it's different than memorizing a script.
Exactly.
Or the lyrics to a song.
Right.
Muscle memory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because there's 5 different patterns, it became a bit of a challenge. But so I know box 1 really well, and I think everybody out there that plays guitar probably knows that one really well.
Not everybody.
But in any case, I started working on the other so that I could play up the neck as well. And there's some really good stuff on YouTube that has helped in terms. I still struggle with, I think that there is, as a technician, I'm probably, I would say, in the very good range, but as a creative artist, I have a long way to go. I don't know how to add the licks. I don't know, I can't create my own. I have to pick them up from somebody else, and I'm hoping that eventually some of that will rub off on me, and I'll be able to add my own.
I have in fact, his name's right there, Richie Ricker. He did the harmony vocals on the Fredericktown Christmas, but you usually see him playing the bass, but he can play just about anything. He's one of those people that if he has never seen a particular instrument ever, maybe it's from Africa or something, you hand it to him, and then you go to use the restroom, and you come back, he's playing it. He just gets it. There are people like that. And on one of my songs, or a couple of my songs, he plays the bass. And he just wants to know, basically, well, just play through one time for me. Okay. He's just trying to memorize, okay, he's going to make a change here. Okay. And he used to come out when I'd play live sometimes if I performed close to where he lived. Linganore Wine Cellars and Red Shedman Farm Brewery in Mount Airy. He lived only about 4 miles from there. So I would be setting up, and he'd just show up with his bass amp and bass guitar. He goes, "Do you mind?" No. Because he sings good harmonies, and in that type of a venue, it's mostly cover songs, and most of the ones I sing are from our time period, 60s,
Sure.
70s. And he knows those songs. But then I'd play an original. And I'd look over at him and say, "Richie, I'm sorry, this is one of my originals. You haven't heard this yet. And he goes, okay. And I would start, and all of a sudden I realized there's a bass player playing right along with me, and it sounds like we've rehearsed this 4,000 times.
Uh-huh.
And I said, how can you do that? He goes, I just hear it.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't do that.
No, I cannot either. So when you were talking about the creative side, there are people that they just get it.
Right.
Yes, did they learn scales? More than likely. But it's like, I marvel at the performer who's strumming and singing, and then they throw in a little run.
Yeah, right.
And
Doc
go
Watson.
right back without missing a beat.
That's right.
I would literally have to stop and then go plunk, 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 stop, go back to the strumming.
Right.
How that just doesn't work in my brain doesn't function that way, nor do my fingers. So what is your preferred genre of music? You mentioned John Denver, all that stuff. Is that what you prefer to play? Like if you're just sitting around at home and you have a half an hour to play guitar and sing or play, what are you playing?
Well, it's a mix of John Denver, Steve Goodman, Arlo Guthrie.
Mm-hmm.
Those are probably my three top artists that I would say. I would just play their stuff.
Yeah. No, that's why I don't progress, because if I have the time to sit down and play, I'll go right back to, there's always like the one song is the first one I always play.
Uh-huh.
It's when I go to a music shop and I ask them, do you mind if I try that guitar? There's certain chords, it's the first chord. A G chord is one of the first ones if I just want to hear the whole. And I'll go up to the 14th fret and play the beginning of Beginnings by Chicago Transit Authority because I want to see if it intonates well.
Uh-huh.
And I just love that sound anyway. So we tend to be, I think, creatures of habit.
Uh-huh.
So yes, we'll go back and play those. I guess that there are favorite songs to play, not necessarily, but sometimes our favorite song to also listen to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I have to admit, I've learned a whole lot of other songs because Barry Bryan has convinced me that that's what I need to do, rather than be stuck in just one, set of songs that I've played since I was a kid. I needed to branch out, and he's really pushed me to do that.
He's another person who plays, when you see him, most of the time he's playing bass.
Right.
And I've only heard him what I call doodle on the guitar, and it's usually where we are somewhere rehearsing for a show, and he's playing bass, and there's 3 of us or 4 of us, and we've finished for the day, and he says, do you mind if I just play that guitar? And he'll sit over to the side, and I'm having a conversation with someone, so I'm not really listening, but I think he's probably a very good guitar player.
Oh, there's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. He's not only does he know technically what to do, but he's also creative in what he does. And I think that comes from all the experience that he has. It's amazing. I love listening to his stories.
Well, when you talk to him next, remind him that Todd has tried many times to get him to agree to be on the podcast.
Okay.
And he just basically says no. And it's...
what a shame, because he's got some great stories.
Well, that's just it, because the unfortunate part of running shows and being on a committee or something like that is I know a large number of musicians, but one of the reasons I started doing the podcasts was I love backstories. Like when you watch a movie and the extra is the director talking about this scene or the actors talking about, how they had to prep. I love backstories. Or the author of the book talking about how difficult or easy it was to turn it into a movie.
Sure.
Dialogue changes, things like that.
Right.
So because I didn't get the chance to chat I would be up on the stage running sound, and I'd look at, and people are chit-chatting all the time. They got to know each other really well.
Right.
My conversations were, do you need anything from me? Do you have a preamp that you need to plug in?
Right.
How does that sound to you? Sounds good to me, that kind of thing.
Right.
And, we're only doing 2 songs. Remember, 2 songs, not 3, 2. Don't do a medley. That. So that was my conversation with most of the folks. So doing the podcast, it's my way of delving into the backgrounds and the stories of people who I know or I'm getting to know.
Uh-huh.
And it's been fascinating for me, and I'm sure you'll agree because you're an educator, is when I've taught whatever I'm teaching, I learn more than the students.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah, which is
Absolutely
one of the reasons I
true.
love doing it, because I know I'm going to learn from this.
Uh-huh.
So that's why I do the podcast.
I see.
Because I pick up on things, and I love microphones. I love the sound of it goes back to being a kid and listening to the radio DJs.
Right.
And they always had that big, and, the one thing is you want to get the low end, you go up close to the microphone. And you want to be thinner voice, you go way back like this. But it's just, I love the sound of that. So this is another way for me to be able to speak into a microphone from the comfort of my office.
Right.
Instead of having to find a gig somewhere and do it on stage, if that makes any sense.
Sure. It does. Perfect sense.
And I think most of us, maybe not most, but I'll still use, most of us don't think that our background is of that much importance and whether people would be interested in it or not. But I look at it as, yeah, they actually do. We just lived it, so to us it's no big deal.
That's right.
No, it's just what I did,
Well, when you had mentioned, doing a podcast, I thought to myself, what the heck can I talk about?
Mm-hmm.
And music has been a part of my life, my entire life. I sang in the chorus in high school, played in the band.
You did?
Yeah, I played the tuba. And if you put the tuba, the sousaphone, next to me, it probably was almost as tall as I was and almost weighed as much as I did. And I did that for 2 years. So I learned how to read the bass clef from that. Mm-hmm. And in college, I sang in the chorale. And then the chorale director created a group like the old Christie Minstrels.
Yes.
I played guitar for that. And then he was asked to put together a band for a play, and I played bass for that. So music has always been a part of my life. It's just something that I really love, and I could probably talk all day about that.
Now, was it frustrating as an adult and being an educator and just work in general and raising family and things like that, because you didn't have the time to spend on music as much as you might have wanted? Or did you just take it in stride and realize that, I'll do it when I can and I'll enjoy it? And
I tried to take it in stride, but there were times when it was frustrating. But I've always had some outlet. When I was in Chicago and teaching and, raising a family and all that, they talked me into directing a folk mass group. So that was every Sunday I would get up there and, sing with this small group around me. And so that, sort of fulfilled that outlet. Mm-hmm. When I got here, I did the same thing for a while. And then it wasn't until I found the jams and the old-time musicians. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know there was a genre called old-time. Mm-hmm. I always thought of it as bluegrass, and they would probably be irate now with me saying, connecting the two like that. But, finding that group and then eventually running into Barry has opened a whole, meeting you, mm-hmm. Has opened up a whole new world for me.
Well, and I'll agree with you there. What has transpired since the onset of the COVID virus, where we, in all walks of life, globally, we lost time, right. Basically.
Right.
I mean, we didn't lose time. We just lost the ability to do things during that time.
Right.
And, of course, one of the things that went away was live performing. But then Zoom and online stuff kind of took over, the people who were savvy enough to learn that and do it. But doing the open mics, and I got burned out. You do open mics for so long, and if you keep doing them, you don't realize how tired you are. It's when you stop for a period of time and somebody says, "Oh, you want to do it again?" No. You can fill in occasionally,
Sure.
but to do it again, because it is somewhat of a grind. The thing about the open mics and the songwriter showcases, like we did at Brewer's Alley, and I used to do one on Sundays at the Frederick Coffee Company, is I was continually meeting new performers and new musicians.
Uh-huh.
During COVID, we didn't have that. And since COVID, for the acoustic musician like ourselves, the coffee house venue circuit has pretty much gone away.
Right.
Because like Mike Winder at the Frederick Coffee Company, a wonderful man. I've so enjoyed working with him over the years, and he was very gracious to allow me to schedule as much music as I could, which was usually in the evening, occasionally afternoons. Is during COVID, because everything was so restrictive, he would close. He kept his business open, but would close at 5 or 6. And once things opened up, he realized, well, gosh, I don't need to stay open in the evenings anymore because I actually lost money in the evenings.
Oh, wow.
When we would do music, the open mics, we would fill the room, but the people would stick around for 3 hours. They'd order a sandwich, and that was it, or they'd get a coffee, and that was it. And although the room was full and there was a lot of chit-chat, the cash register wasn't ringing as often, but you still had to have the same complement of employees. They then had to clean up late in the evening. They had to run to the bank when it's dark out. He was always worried about the young kids doing that because coffee houses tend to be more of a younger employee age range. And so those of us who love to perform that, what I call the acoustic stuff, or some people refer to as folk. Folk to me is singing about rivers and streams and things like that.
Right.
Acoustic is playing acoustic instruments, maybe amplified, and singing pop songs or folk songs or whatever.
Right.
So I like to refer to it as acoustic. But we've had to make do with the wineries, the breweries, the distilleries, which are wonderful, with the exception that most of them, to look really neat on the inside, a lot of hard surface, metal, hardwood, high ceilings, they're echo chambers.
Right.
So just to have 40 people in one of those rooms having normal conversations, it's chatter.
Yes.
You add live music to that, and you've just risen the bar even higher. So now the people have to shout at each other. The musicians can't hear themselves, so they turn the volume up, which makes the people talk louder. And it's a cacophony.
Yeah.
And it's not the pleasure it was singing in a coffee house or a small room.
Right.
So I do miss that. And I don't get, my email list has shrunk of musicians. And the reason I say that is some of them have moved. Some of them have passed away, some of the older ones. And some of them just don't do it anymore.
I see.
And so many people now, I'll send out an email and I don't get a response.
Is that right?
And I'm thinking, why? They used to respond all the time. And then I'll get a message on Facebook. Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Well, that's not what Facebook's for.
That's right.
That's what an email or a text or a phone call is.
You got it.
I had one musician who I kept sending him emails saying, would you like to perform at, because I booked a couple venues. Never heard back from him. And about 6 months later, he sends me a message on Facebook and says, hey, would you forget about me? I'd love to play. How come you never contact me? I said, I've been sending you email. Oh, I don't use email anymore. I use Facebook. I said, no, I don't. If you'd like to play and you'd like to work with me, it's by email.
Yeah. I'm on Facebook a lot, but I don't use it as a way to communicate with people. I use email or phone call or something like that.
It is wonderful to connect with high school classmates.
Yes.
But outside of that, it's wonderful to once in a while see some musical performance that I couldn't have gone to it back in the 1970s because I was working or doing whatever. And I say, and there's the concert, and it's on YouTube, but it's linked into Facebook.
Right.
And I click on it, I'm watching the concert. That's what I love it. But I don't like all the other stuff. So from a tuning standpoint on your guitars, do you tune to pitch? Or do you lower your tunings?
No, I tune to pitch.
Do you?
Yeah. Now, I don't know if that'll ever change. I used to, when I sang in the chorus and in the chorale, I sang first tenor.
Mm-hmm.
So my voice was a lot higher. As I've gotten older, my voice has changed.
Yeah.
So eventually I may have to change the tuning.
Now, do you still try to sing the songs with the same fingerings and the same chord structures, or have you altered them to so that your voice can accept the?
I have not changed.
Mm-hmm.
I use the chords that I've learned for that song. So,
because I had to start for the longest time, I tuned a half step down.
okay.
It was just more comfortable for my vocal range. Now I play a full step down.
Uh-huh.
It's just more comfortable because what happens is if I play in an ensemble and they say, we're doing this in, C progression, great. I'm way up here. I can't do it.
Yeah, right.
And so if I want to do some of my songs and have people join me on my songs, or if I'm going to do some America tunes, my buddy up in New England had me play with his band. We played at Patriot Place, which is where the Patriots play football.
Uh-huh.
And they do kind of it's not an acoustic set really, but he plays an electrified acoustic, and he had me come up and we did 2 or 3 America tunes that I play regularly. So we didn't have to really learn anything new. We just had to get our timing down. And then I played on a couple other ones. Everybody tunes to pitch. And so for me, I'm way up here like this. It's just that doesn't work. So if I have, like if I said, Guy, you want to play and we'll do this American tune, I would hand you a guitar that's already tuned to full step down.
Or you could tell me the key that you're playing in. And I could, I think I know enough to be able to switch to a different key. A lot of times I'll notice the old-time guitar players will use capo.
Yes.
And I'll play in the original. Mm-hmm. So if they're playing in the key of A, if the song is in the key of A, they'll, capo up 3 and then play G. I'm playing in the key of A because I just know that. And I remember my dad once saying to me, you don't ever want to use a capo. He says, cheaters use capos. Well, I would argue with him today because there's times I've used a capo.
Chet Atkins used to use a capo.
Yes, he did. and he turned me on to Chet Atkins.
Yeah.
Chet Atkins is probably my favorite guitarist.
Yeah.
I'd love to be able to play like him, but...
So you learned music theory fairly young, basically.
Yes.
And that is the one thing that has, for me, because I did not.
I see.
We had music elementary school, but it's really basic stuff. My mom had asked both me and my 2 brothers if we wanted to learn or take piano lessons, and we had an old piano, it wasn't in tune.
It's the best instrument to learn on.
It is, and all we could remember was our buddies going, "Oh, I gotta go to piano lessons. I hate this." So when she said, "You want to take piano lessons?" "No, thank you for asking." I wish,
right?
Even if it had only been for a year, because and I had a piano player in college who was the piano player who accompanied the Glee Club. I was in the Glee Club my freshman year of college, and then I went to the Oratorio Society, which was much more of a concert, a vocal group, and then they had one above that, but I was not to that level. But anyway, the piano player was phenomenal. I mean, he could play anything.
Uh-huh.
And he said to me one time, he said, do you play an instrument? I said, I play guitar. He goes, oh, good. Did you ever learn piano? And I said, no, I didn't want to. And he goes, you know what, Todd? You can go anywhere in the world. If you stay at a hotel and they have a piano, you can sit down and people will come right over and you can be the hit because piano music is universal. I thought, maybe I should have taken those lessons.
Well, not only did I start with theory, but I also went on and got a minor in music.
Oh, you did?
Yes. I wanted to, when I had a really great opportunity in my sophomore year at college. Was at a fraternity party, and the choral director was there. And we were all sitting around singing Irish songs, drinking our beers and all that kind of thing. And he came up to me and he says, you really have a good voice. He said, I'd like you to join our choral group. And I was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. Nobody's ever asked me to do this, right? So I joined and eventually became a student conductor.
Oh, wow.
So, and I had him for class. So I learned more theory while I was there. And then after I left, I wanted to become a choral director. And so I went to the University of Loyola in Chicago and took up harmony, which was the next step. And then my job sort of got in the way, and I wasn't able to go on beyond that. And never did fulfill the dream of directing a choral group, but that was one of my dreams.
I just had a thought. Places like Homewood, Buckingham's Choice, the assisted living or the organizations that have that transitional housing,
Yes.
they're always looking for some sort of entertainment to offer to the residents. And the residents are on all different levels. And I would be willing to bet you, especially some of the larger ones where they have hundreds of people. And I say this only because having gone to the Messiah at the wine brewery last night, I was absolutely amazed how many people in the audience, and the theater was probably 90% full, how many in there were singing right along in the parts where they allow you to sing along,
Right.
and how many good vocalists there were. Now, maybe some of those folks sing at the choir at church, or maybe not. But I am sure there are people in, say, Homewood or Buckingham's Choice or some of the other ones who would love to, on a weekly basis or however often, start a choral group, but they would need someone to direct it. And it sounds like you have just the qualification.
Wow.
And you basically start off, figuring out who's, tenor, soprano, baritone, whatever it is, and moving around like you would. And then picking a fairly easy tune that they'd all recognize so they don't have to read music necessarily, because some of them might be able to sing really well but can't read music, but you could always have it there. And then just work your way into more complicated things to a point where, because it is more of a hobby for them. But I would be willing to bet you it would be like the people who love to play bridge. So once a week they have a bridge party.
Right.
And that's just, they look forward to it all week. The open mics at the Frederick Coffee Company, when I started, it wasn't so much the open mics, it was the Sunday night All Folked Up called Snafu. And it was a songwriter event that David Morreale put on. That's how I got into writing songs and performing them. And I would look forward to that all week long.
Is that right?
And then cringe after my performance, knowing that I bungled that one and this, oh God, I missed that chord, But it was like a happening, and we all did that, even the people who didn't perform, the people who would go to it. So I would think that would be the perfect thing for you.
I never thought of that.
Because I'm sure they would just absolutely jump at the chance.
I've often thought about going there and, just singing to entertain them.
Oh, yeah, and you could do that as well. Because many of those places, and many have a budget for that. I could care less whether they pay me.
Yeah, I'm the same way.
It'd be more just for, I'm having a good time.
Right.
But I would think they would, because they have event directors. And it's like the person, someone made a comment to me about some of the performers at some of these wineries, like, gosh, that person, how do they get all these gigs? They're not that good. I said, they're probably really good at promoting themselves. And the other thing is the person who probably sets the music schedule and hires the people probably doesn't work weekends. They work Monday through Friday. So they never hear the person. They're just happy. Oh, gosh, I filled that date. So unless someone at the winery contacts them and say, hey, don't bring that person back. They were horrible. They're just happy they filled the calendar.
I see.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if there's an event director, I'm sure for each one of those, they might wear multiple hats and they have another job, but they do that on the side. They would just jump at because if you're doing something for the people who live there, and all the event director has to do is say, can you do it on what day of the week could you do it, and from what time, here. They don't have to do anything.
Yeah, I see.
All they have to know is you can show up, or gosh, I'm not feeling well. I don't want to come out. We'll have to cancel today, so they can let everybody know.
I see.
But it sounds like you'd be really good at that.
Well, I'd be willing to give it a shot.
Yeah. I can see you up there with the baton and the...
I still have a baton somewhere.
Do you really?
Yeah. I started a group when I was in Chicago, and we actually did a real easy version of the Messiah for the church. There weren't too many people that came, but it was such a thrill to be able to direct, a bunch of my friends. Guys who, if as a kid I would have said to them, you want to come and join us and sing, they would never have even entertained the idea. But as we got older, they either their girlfriends talked them into coming, or they overcame that, whatever it was as a kid that prevented them from doing that kind of thing.
Now, do you find...
And they always wanted to sing bass.
Oh, did they really? Whether they could or not. Probably.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about the, robust.
It was interesting in high school that if somebody asked, what section are you in, I'd say tenor. They'd say, oh. Somebody come up and say, well, what about you? Oh, I'm a bass. Oh, they were the star.
Yeah, the tenor is the frou-frou guy.
That's right.
And unfortunately, I was a tenor. So it's like last night, there were 4 soloists. There was a tenor, bass. He's actually a baritone, but he was doing the bass part.
Uh-huh.
There was the mezzo soprano?
Yes.
And then I've forgotten what they called the other one. She was down a little bit, and I can't remember the names of all.
Well, there's an alto.
But she was probably doing the alto part.
Okay.
But evidently the soprano, she got the biggest applause. I thought, and my wife thought, that the girl who sang the alto part was better.
Is that right?
But I think it's sort of like in football, the quarterback is the one who gets the accolades.
Yeah,
the running back who just ran 80 yards to score the touchdown, everybody claps and whatever, but MVP is the quarterback.
That's right.
It's sort of like that. The soprano, because they have to hit these high notes, is, oh my gosh, they can do that? Whoa, they're great. Well, but this person was just as good, if not better.
Right.
But it's not that extreme. I guess it's the extreme, like you're saying, everybody wants to be the bass.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you direct a choral group like that, do you sing along with them?
No.
No.
Well, during rehearsals, I do.
Yeah.
So I really broadened my range when I was directing that group. But then I stopped, and so my range shrunk. But I would sing each part with them because we were singing in 3 parts. And the girls caught on right away. And, the only time I really sang with them was when they were when they were struggling to find the right note. And I had to have a piano player,
Right.
someone to play the piano so that I could hear the note myself, because sometimes it's difficult to hear those. Anyway, the guys were really a struggle to get to sing on key, especially.
Is that because they weren't necessarily involved with singing because they were too involved with sports when they were younger?
I think it was lack of experience, yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Just lack of experience. They all were able to sing well enough to carry a tune, but once you try and divide things, then they would get lost.
Well, I sang in that glee club, and that was in since it's guys, it would not have been 4-part harmony, but it was a lot of different ranges. In the oratorio society, yes, you had the sopranos, the altos, the baritones, and so forth, and tenors. So you were all singing different parts.
Right.
And I love that, how it always seems like the female voices lead and then the male voices come in. Never seems to be the other way around.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, why is that? And there must be a reason.
Mainly because I think the sopranos usually are singing the
melody
main,
line?
Yeah, the main theme, the melody line.
Yeah.
And everybody else is sort of supporting that. Sometimes the tenors will come in with a part of the melody line. But for the most part, I think it's because that's the melody.
Yeah. Let's go back to guitars for a moment.
Okay.
Some of the guitar players who listen to this podcast are interested in. They already know you play your is it E-Ross, E-R-O-S-S, or E-R-O-S?
ROS.
Okay. Or your Martin guitar, and you own the Gibson. They're going to be curious, what brand of strings and what gauge do you play?
I usually play medium gauge, and I stick with the Martin strings, mainly because, I'm sort of a Martin guy, I guess.
Yep.
I think that they understand guitars and what, although I have to admit, I didn't call the Martin, did I call the Martin shop? I called somebody, it might have been Sweetwater, and asked them what string I should put on my Martin. And they gave me a suggestion, and it just didn't sound right. Mm-hmm. So I went back to the ones that I was using, and I can't tell you the numbers or anything. But yeah. So I went back to the numbers, to the ones that I was using.
Now, how often do you find you need to change the strings?
I'm changing them a lot more frequently now than I did, because I find that even though some of the strings are treated with this special coating so that they don't erode, I can still see some of the erosion on the strings. And when I start seeing that, then I know it's time to change.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, that's especially true of my Martin. The E-Ross I play a lot, so there's a lot more on. But as soon as it starts to sound dead, that's when I'll change.
Now, when you strum, are you strumming with a pick or your fingers, or do you do it both ways?
I do both, but if strumming-wise, I usually use a pick. And then every once in a while, I'll try and get my fingers going to finger pick, arpeggio the chords and stuff.
Now, if you play a song where you're just finger style,
yes,
do you use finger picks or do you use your bare fingers?
I use thumb pick and bare fingers.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people use. I've just never. I had more success with the thumb pick, the metal or the plastic finger picks. I ended up poking people's eyes out with those things, or getting caught in the string and just forget this. But I'm just bare fingers because when you play bare finger and you put a thumb pick on, your thumb is raised up, and I didn't stick with it long. But I must admit, people who I know who use a thumb pick and then their fingers, they have a much clearer low note, whereas mine can be a little thuddy, muddy. I mean, I like that, but it's not as clear because the pick gives you that.
Sure.
It's like when I was playing back in the 1970s with my friend Rich. We were doing a duo, and I played a Martin D28 at the time. He played a Yamaha 12-string that he just kept 6 strings on, and we used a microphone out front. Of course, we put it right in front of the sound hole, which you're not supposed to do. And I would always strum with just my fingers, and I had to learn to use a flat pick to strum because with that microphone in front of the sound hole, my guitar just sounded way too boomy and muddy.
I see.
So using a pick thinned it out a little bit and made it much more pleasurable for the people sitting in the audience, and also my partner could hear what I was playing better.
I see.
But it depends on the song.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what song are you learning right now, if you have one that you're learning?
I'm trying to learn what's caught me off guard here. Let me see.
That's my job.
I can't remember
Who's
the
it
title.
by?
It's when people ask me questions like this, my mind goes blank right away.
Well, you know what? I just noticed we're at an hour and 16 minutes, so we can just leave it there and pick that conversation up at another time. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's completely fair.
So have you had fun?
Absolutely. This was a lot. I'll tell you, you're great at sort of drawing things out, and I felt very comfortable. I know that I told you I would be nervous, but I felt so relaxed. It was just like we were having a conversation.
Well, that's all it is.
Yeah, well, I guess that's true.
Yeah. The one thing you allowed me to do this time is you allowed me too much airtime.
Oh.
I have to remember that I'm the host. I'm supposed to be directing everything to you so you can. But anyways, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it was my pleasure.
And for those of you listening, thanks for tuning in to the Wispy Mob Music Acoustic Radio podcast series. And you can check it on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, or you can go to Podbean. Most people just use iTunes or Apple Podcasts. So thanks so much, and we will catch you next time.